Gentlemen, welcome to the third meeting of the House General Government Budget Committee. Today, well, first off, let me go ahead and ask for bill introductions if we have any. Wasn't by any chance a bill introduction that you were copying? Nope, okay. All right, seeing none. We have a very limited agenda today, which is good. I have bad news for Secretary Burns-Wallace. We're going to be scheduled on the floor at 4:30, so we can only grill you for an hour. And so I apologize for that. But that is the only item on our agenda today, so I would like to welcome to committee OITS Secretary, well, and also Department of Administration Secretary Burns-Wallace. Welcome to committee.
Good afternoon. It's good to see everyone and good to join you. Thank you for the invitation. And as you all know, I do wear multiple hats. And so I come to you today as the Chief Information Technology Officer, representing the IT operations of the state. And we were asked to give a few updates. Step back. It's kind of loud. A few updates of some of the activities that we've used state general funds for over the last few years. And so what I started with is I had my team go back and just kind of make sure we were, that I was looking back at what those funds had come in and for different things, because some of those precede me. Can I go forward? Nope, you're good. Oh, there we go. There we go. And so when I looked back, probably funds have come in since about FY18 for various different projects. And then if you all remember in FY20, there's a feedback. In FY20, we were able to actually add a reoccurring SGF at around $4 million for rehab and repair. So I'll share a little bit of what we've been able to use that for and what some of our future plans are, but I'll walk through some of the work that's happened in between as we go through this. So, let me step back. So there's kind of 4 areas I'll hit: as a service, data center, network modernization, rehab, and repair as we walk through. So I'll start with as a service. And as a service, just, for in general, is this idea of taking points of our work and consolidating it, bringing it up to the enterprise level, but also leveraging in both software technology and sometimes third parties as the entity that's delivering that work. You get economies of scale. Sometimes, particularly as technologies move forward, we can't always keep up. And so you're able to leverage as a entity more broader what we can do, how fast we can do it, how we can modernize, response times, things of that nature. So early, and this predates me as this move to as a service started in the OITS space. But the areas that were identified early on as that funding started to move through, including or touched in various ways on mainframe as a service, desktop as a service, service as a service, and data center as a service. So just to give you kind of briefly, the mainframe as a service, we work with our third-party partner in Sono. They host our mainframes, support 24/7. And so it is something that they host, that then the agencies that use and that their system sits on mainframes are able to access. That has been stood up for the last 4 years, fully operational. We're actually moving into our next iteration of it, and we have an RFP out right now as we continue to do that work. It's interesting because as technologies continue to modernize, I have some agencies who are shifting how they use mainframe. So we will probably see in this next round that we have a smaller utilization of mainframe, as some apps and some systems are moving off of mainframe and say into direct cloud environments and not necessarily using mainframes. But we still have a number of major systems that do. That partnership is working very well. We tweaked that contract when I came in, but having just good work there. The RFP is not because we're having an issue, it's just that time, right? And it's important in this IT space that when that time comes, we're making sure we're still with the best vendor, making, the best match, all of those types of things. Desktop as a service is a leasing service that we put in place now over 4 years ago. This is where agencies, instead of having to always have a big outlay of dollars, like, oh, we need to replace X number of laptops, and you see those as large capital, every few years, we stood up the leasing so an agency could level out their budget to know every 3 years we're rotating through, and you're basically leasing the equipment. So we have third-party partners that then provide those on lease. And the beauty of it is you can keep your equipment much more up to date, right? So in 3 years, it's kind of like, when you're leasing a car, like you can just take it back in and get the new model and keep moving. But you're also able to level your costs so that you're not having big, huge spikes every 3 years. You know what your projections are going to be because you're leasing those particular products. So that's been going good. We also are in our newer next iteration of that. We've had our current vendor. We're looking to open that up and have additional vendors so that we have more options available to state agencies, but continue to have that service as well. Service as a service is really started as kind of a consolidation of some of our service desk efforts, efforts to delivery of troubleshooting and things of that nature. And we pulled in many of the service desks that exist throughout the agencies in various spaces. We use a software tool in this instance, and it's called ServiceNow. When it was initially rolled out early on, probably in 18, 19, it was rolled out with one module, and it was really about incidents. So it was like this incident response. You had an issue, you had a problem, you contacted the service desk, they put in a ticket, it moved its way through. But this tool is a really powerful tool that does a lot of different things to optimize your organization at the enterprise level. So while it was working in that one module, what we did is we actually relaunched or redeployed it in February of 21. We now have 40 active modules. No, we have, let me look. Is it the other way? It's 40 agencies. Yep, we have 15 active modules, 40 agencies accessing those modules, right? So we're using the functionality. This includes modules that include things like asset management. We're getting ready and we're working on one for project managers where they can actually use the module to track in there, right? When we stood it up initially, it was for incidents. It was for us to have better response time and tracking of our incidents and all of that. But because this tool is so much more dynamic, we were already paying for it. Agencies were used to it. We really have been able to expand it, and we continue to expand it, which is just a very it's one of those things that's exciting because agencies can see, they can link into the main system, and they have their own instances. So if I'm an agency, I can pick and choose what I need out of it and adapt it to my environment, but we're all still in the same host environment, brings economies of scale, things of that nature. And then the last as a service was data center as a service. And this is what probably most people remember. This was the moving out of land and data center, the big move to Unisys. So let's see if this will move for me. You get it? Oh, need my visual. So we completed this project. Uh-oh, go back one more. There, right there. That's the one I needed. This is the before and the after. So that data center, well, not after, it's where we are right now. We're actually getting ready to stand up. This is 8th floor landing. So we're getting ready to stand up walls and make it operational so that an agency can use it as office space. But you can see from being that full data center to like our current day that we have now cleared it out, it's ready to go. We're ready to stand up those walls. We're going to be able, and remember the Landon data center was on the 7th and the 8th floor, kind of one corner of that building. It opens up about, I want to say it's 15,000 square foot between those two spaces that we'll be able to now use for state offices, right? Which is, that amazing thing. So with that move of the Landon Data Center, you can go forward. So the data center migration included not just the completing of Landon, and that's what everyone thinks about, moving to our third-party hosted, which is Unisys, but we did still have some smaller pieces that were too small to go to Unisys or because of other guidelines or restrictions needed to stay on premise. So what we did is we had a smaller data center in Eisenhower. We invested just a little to make sure increase security, caging, and to adapt that data center. In any of those smaller pieces that needed to stay on-prem, we were able to then house them in the Eisenhower data center. Much smaller footprint, we can control. Initially, the plan with the as a service with the data center was to have a local partner that those facilities went into. When we started to look in that, it just wasn't cost effective for agencies, right? What it would cost for them to put just like one rack into a local partner, where when we could do some minor modifications and prepare Eisenhower to be able to hold that, and we can stack multiple. If you just need one piece of a rack, I can put 3 or 4 agencies into that same rack accordingly, things of that nature. So that entire data center migration, which we did complete on September 2021, it was a project that I want to say started in 2018 and was initially projected to last maybe 18 months. When I came in the fall of 2019, it was completely stalled, if you all remember. We were only at 25%, and for whatever reason couldn't get past it. Our vendors were pointing at us, we were pointing at them. It was a he said, she said. We're complete, we're done, we're utilizing it. We are seeing gains, and now we're actually, so we took the land and data center and again migrated all of those systems, but we do have other systems around the state that have the potential to also live now in Unisys now that we're stood up. So we've just started conversations like with the hospitals, which weren't in Landon, but could definitely utilize the new third-party managed data center, better speeds, protection, all connectivity, all of those types of things. So now that we're done with that initial migration of clearing out Landon, we can now look around and see where else this resource could be leveraged. One of the important things about this, for those who have been following along this journey, one of the issues when we first stood up this contract with Unisys for this third-party managed data center was that it wasn't in Kansas. Our original site was in Minnesota, and our backup was in Virginia, I believe. By the time we got through all the negotiations that needed to happen and got through the he said, she said, and figured out where our issues were, came to the table with our partner Unisys on this, we landed being able to stand up that primary third-party hosted data center in Overland Park. Yeah. And our backup is in Minnesota, right? Close proximity, all of those things. We were very excited about that. We couldn't do that without that partnership with our, I call them a partner, not a vendor, because you got to sit down and work through some things to get there, to figure out what the issues were, what those delays were, where we were falling down, and we did it. And we're seeing the fruits of it day in and day out. So that, and I see, the whole migration, because most people just think, oh, it was just, moving everything out of Landon. It was actually a lot of different pieces around that, but it also opens up a lot more as we think about what our future looks like, what our data center needs are across the state, what that capacity is. When you have that third party hosted, you have that muscle that can flex differently for you, right? And it opens up, new things and new ideas for what we need and what we can do. So we're trying to leverage into that. So just have a couple more, take me forward. Network upgrades and modernization. So this is something that, again, part of it when I first came in started being highlighted when we were looking at the data center migration, because there was conversations around where our network can't handle the migration, right? Some of that was true and some of it was kind of a mix, but there was a reality that our network sat on equipment that was, end of life, beyond, no longer supported. So we've had specific investments that we had asked for around the actual move, but with the approval of the R&R funds, the rehab and rehabilitation funds, that allowed us to do not just the little pieces we needed in relationship to make sure we could do the data center move, we were able to move forward with kind of the full rehab or upgrade, that modernization of the switches and the major routers in the Capitol complex. Right? And this is the hardware that everything runs through and sits on, right? So last year when this building was doing its upgrade to do this the the virtual state house, we needed to go in and upgrade your switches before the virtual state house could come in because it couldn't run on in that old equipment, for example, right? So we're excited to say, and this project, if we were to replace the entire Capitol complex in 1 year, it would have been about a $12 to $15 million project. And we would have had to come and ask for that enhancement. We need 15 million, da, 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 da. That R&R fund is powerful because what we were able to do then, we planned it across 3 years to do it in phases. We knew we had 4 million coming in that R&R fund. So we used certain percentages of it combined with other things that we needed to be able to make sure that we could walk through it. We've actually been able to complete it a year earlier, not like get closer to completion. We thought it would take us 3 years to get completely through the Capitol complex before we could start working statewide. We had a little extra. We were able to get some things early, got some good rates on some of the equipment, and we already have started the phase 2. So we are like 90% done with the Capitol complex, and we've already started hitting some of our statewide network, particularly focusing where we have larger hubs, Kansas City, Wichita, where we have larger, more pieces of equipment because we have more state agencies. But that leads into, with the R&R fund, if you can go forward for me. So our priorities in that space really have been the network because it is what we ride on. It is what our systems sit on, our connectivity across the state. So our first priority was the Capitol complex. Like I said, we're 90% complete there. And now we're working statewide, again, for those routers and switches all throughout the state to upgrade them into a modernized state, taking us out of outdated equipment that's at end of life and putting us in. And the interesting thing is the way my team talks about it, we had, we went from like the iPhone 7 and we like just jumped over a few and went all the way, we're going all the way to like the 11, maybe the 12, right? So in some ways, we should have had investments along the way that kind of stair-stepped us. But because we didn't, what we're doing now is we're trying to look and make sure we're replacing the equipment with equipment that gives us the flexibility of where we need to be in 3 to 5. So not just upgrading a little, but making sure we're buying the best equipment that positions us for what's next to support this network. So that takes a little bit more money, but again, we're now able to plan it across a few years. We can do, this third, this third, this third as we go through. We've used a little bit of that R&R money for other projects that also were necessary during this time. You all may remember I talked about upgrading the phones, right? Because it's a mini computer, right? And the reality was that the phones that were on our desk at that time, again, they were all end of life, out of date, and can create a security risk because they're a mini computer, not just a regular telephone. So we have been able to move through that telephone upgrade. We replaced more than 8,000 handsets. And because of being in the midst of COVID while doing this, we also then enabled soft phone technology, that technology where basically you're able to use your laptop as a phone and you're off-site. And so it's almost like they see your desk phone, but it's calling into your computer. This was very helpful early on during the pandemic for some of our service desk and call in to still be able to deliver services, but in a remote way, but through a secure phone. So they're not using their personal or their cell or things of that nature. So we were able to enable some of that along the way. Hadn't planned on it, but we were able to pivot, had the dollars, and we're doing the work. So we incorporated that. We're about 90% complete. Some of that it's just timing of getting everything through. The last place that we've used rehab and repair is just in general doing some security and monitoring enhancements. And this is stuff that's just kind of like the necessary upgrading some of our monitoring, strengthening some of our areas, firewalls and things like that. Over the last few years, we've also learned a lot and tweak things. And so we use some of that R&R to invest in kind of hardening some of that cybersecurity places. But also there's a couple of places where We're investing in technology that gives us a little bit more of remote access, particularly for at the enterprise level. If you had a state of emergency and you couldn't physically get to a set of equipment that was an enterprise level equipment, having the remote capabilities to be able to access it and control it, things like that. That's the type of things that we've tried to invest in over the last couple of years with the rehab and repair, trying to use those dollars more so to really shore up the pieces that allow us to deliver a strong network, a strong set of services and systems. So with that, I will stand for questions.
All right. Well, committee, I do have a couple of questions, so bear with. I will get to you here in just a minute. But first off, and this is actually going to be, I'll address this more with you when you're wearing your D of A hat. But as far as the land and office space, is there anyone already claiming that?
I have to double check. There were, I don't know that we have someone specifically slotted. I think that there's some shuffling going on. We're trying to bring in, and I don't want to say, I can't remember if it's KDHE or revenue, so I'll get back to you. But like, we're trying to bring some offices together. Like, some people are on 3 different floors in Landon, and so some of that space might be same agency, same building, but now they have a office space that is contiguous, allowing them to have more efficiencies and things like that. So it is, some of it's an agency shuffle, and then I think that there might be a piece of it that's still open, but we have a couple of agencies that are looking at it. But I'll send over where we are on taking that space.
Like I said, that's really more of a question that we'll get to down the road a little bit, very little bit, actually, as I look at the schedule. Now, you also mentioned that some agencies were jumping off of the mainframe and going into cloud service. We're not returning to the everybody doing their own thing.
No,
Okay.
it's not that type. It's that as you modernize certain systems, those modernized systems come in a cloud package already. It may not work, or their configuration is no longer using a mainframe, right?
Okay. They're still going
So
through you, though.
yes,
Okay.
we have full coordination. And actually, the great thing I think about the work that's happening right now, agencies are bringing our teams to the table with their vendor to say, what are the questions we need to be asking, as well as we're working with them, because they recognize as they stand that up, it also has to hit our system.
Exactly. That's
So
what I wanted to make sure was still happening.
yes.
Good. All right. Now, service as a service, under that heading. Not it. Oh, I can't read my own handwriting. That's nice. You mentioned that there had been improvements, obviously, in the help desk area. Now, with that app, are we seeing anything that can actually hit the bottom line as far as reduced downtime, reduced expenditures or hours lost, and that sort of thing?
So we've seen some of that. And what I will say is part of the challenge, and one of the reasons that I had it redeployed, was that I wasn't sure we were seeing all of that, because we were really only focusing on kind of incident response time. And we were using the system probably in not the most optimal way. It was almost like a pass through. We were collecting it and then passing it back to agencies versus actually being able to leverage the system into looking at analytics. I brought in a new leader over that area. She immediately started to look at a few things and say, okay, if our downtime is this, or we're getting certain type of calls on Mondays between this hour and this hour, what can we automate so that those aren't calls and people are getting back up faster, right? So we've done some of that. What I'll say is that between that redeployment, we're still trying to, my new leader there, she's all about the KPIs. She's like, we have to be able to quantify, and so we're working through that, because with that redeployment, it gave us an opportunity to actually understand how we need to better use the system and then see and match those onto outcomes. I know they're there. We hadn't been, what I would say, tracking them in a way that I could just easily show you, oh, here's those gains, but we've started now. But now we're able to leverage it across not just incident, but another 2 or 3 other modules to say, not only are they doing something different when they're reporting an incident, I can easily see that they're tracking that in their asset management. So we'll be able to tie back to, is this piece of equipment getting more incidents reported? Is it because it's older? Maybe that's a signal it needs to be replaced. Like, that's what we're going to be able to move to as we continue to maximize the system. So it's not a singular, here's just all the things that are coming in that are a problem, but can we look across our systems to understand, is this signaling that there's action or a trend or things of that nature? So what I will say to you, as I always try to be very transparent, we're working on that.
Excellent. Excellent. I'm kind of a big fan of being able to measure. If you can't measure it, it's not real.
I
And
agree.
perfect example. I'm glad you're heading in the same direction there. Now, you also mentioned that there were some agencies that couldn't move to Unisys. What were some of the that were doing in Eisenhower instead? Or no, sorry, Landon.
No, we're in moving.
Eisenhower, not
Yes.
Landon. Yeah.
Mhm.
What are some examples of that?
So think about like particularly like a non-cabinet agency, right? And so when we talk about those data, the servers that we're moving for like a cabinet agency, we're talking about like big machines and racks upon racks. But I have non-cabinet agencies that literally have one shelf in a rack. The base cost to move into Unisys, that's not cost effective for them because of that foundational cost of what that service is. And it's actually probably not the best setup for them, right? So I can stand up one rack in Eisenhower and have 4 or 5 agencies sit in there, particularly those non-cabinet agencies that have singular, right? The other is that there are a couple, particularly in the CGIS space, where in KHP type, I don't know if Wildlife and Parks has one in there, but I know like for KHP, under their guidelines, right, there are certain of their servers that must stay on premise and can't be off. And some of that is changing, but as as we stand in that space, then we always knew we still needed an on-premise option. But when they first started down this as a service road, and it was interesting. My understanding when I came in, it was that it was not just an on-premise option, but it was an on-premise in Kansas option, right? Because our data center was going to be in Minnesota. So there were some things that initially might have been slated to stay on-prem because they needed to be in Kansas, that once our data center moved to Overland Park, opened it up and some of those were able to go. But there are still some that, based on their statute or regulation, say, I'm using KHP as an example, this particular server that holds this particular information must be on premise. And so we knew we would always have some type of on-premise location. What we did was we just enhanced that Eisenhower space, which was really initially like a one agency kind of room, where we expanded it a little, put in a little bit more security as necessary around it, kind of upgraded it. And then there was plenty of space in there, so we didn't have to change configuration. It was already a data center, so it had all of the necessary mechanical and things of that nature. So we just simply utilized it in that way. Does that help?
Absolutely. And it probably doesn't have the same cooling requirements and so forth that we ran into difficulties with in the past because it's significantly smaller.
Correct. And our intent is that footprint needs to stay smaller, right? We're not trying to like expand it or overload it. That's where these other conversations are happening, that as we're identifying and working with agencies and saying, okay, what else is out there? Okay, where does this need to go? Where does it fit? Let's find it its best home. We have these options.
Excellent. Thank you for that. All right, committee, I've run out of questions from myself. Representative Arnberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sure you knew that I had questions. I just really have two. The first one is, can you educate us on how to transfer phone calls up here?
What I will commit to is I will ensure that our team gets to you all so that we can provide you, whether it's a video or a short, like kind of picture. It's not an easy thing. I will tell you that when my phone rings, I'm usually yelling for Shelly, my assistant, because I was like, I'm not even sure how to pick it up sometimes if it comes in a different way.
I typically just tell them I'm going to call them back on my phone and have to deal with that process.
We will make sure that we get some tools over here so that you all, they're new, they're great when you know how to use them, they're very helpful, but they are mini computers now, and it's not as easy as just pushing one button.
Right. And then the second question I have, which is also probably along the lines of your other hat, but I just want to get a request in. I'd be interested to see what buildings are state-owned buildings and where each department is. Like, is, for instance, and this is not a good example, but say, is DCF in their main building plus 2 other buildings or that kind of stuff? I just am interested in that, and along the lines of buildings, does the state own them or do we rent? So I'm just kind of thinking about that in the back.
We do have that information because we have to keep that type of inventory of all of our leased property, our
Yeah.
owned properties, and state locations.
Yeah.
And my Office of Facility and Property Management, with my other hat, tracks on that because when people do need space, even if it's temporary space, we have to know like what spaces we have. Somebody was looking for a space where they needed to stand up something, and we knew other people we're like, oh, they have a large conference room here. So my team has a lot of that, and I think it is in a way where you can get it and search it, but let me follow up on that for you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I appreciate the fact that you are one of the only secretaries that I know that actually knows their department like the back of their hand, their budget and so forth. And I've said this the past 3 years, but I am very impressed with you and we're lucky to have you in Kansas.
Yeah, it's important.
I would second that motion. Representative Immix.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary, it's always good to see you. Question, this goes a little bit with what the chairman was talking about a second ago. We've got everybody buying in. And last year when we were going through the budget process, it seemed like everybody that came forward was bringing up their charges for OITS. And, well, this is what they gave me to put down, on and on and on. Anyway, I guess my concern would be we are spending great deals of money and a lot of time and upgrading all the systems that we have. And there's a cost to each one of the agencies that are part of this program. Are we making sure, and what is the process to go through to make sure that we don't have agencies jump ship and that they are going to remain part of the system, and that also what are we doing for market analysis to make sure that that stays true?
So what I will say is that is interesting to hear. So one of the things that I'll make sure that we share with this committee, we have done work on OITS rates over the years that I have been here. And we actually not only brought rates down, but we flattened rates and and I would say over half of the agencies have actually seen IT reductions in their overall, and we can actually provide that, and I can show you like how much each of those agencies have gone down. I will say this, because the individual that usually is standing before a budget committee is separate from IT, unfortunately, that individual doesn't always have the information to deliver to you. And so it becomes a knee-jerk reaction to say, well, this is just what IT costs. I will tell you that for the last 2 years, my OITS financial management team has met with every single financial management office, both in cabinet and non-cabinet, and we have gone over their charges and the changes in their charges in relationship to their rates. Now, if that does not pull all the way through to their presentations, we also, the last 2 years, have made ourselves available to each of those agencies to sit down with them prior to them coming into budget if they had any questions around it. And I commit to doing the same. Now, here's also some realities, right? Again, the person standing before you doesn't always completely understand. If you have increased utilization, that has nothing to do with my rate, right? If you grow, if you're doing more things, if you're bringing more things into your environment, your IT costs from one year to another will increase. My rates actually were flat between these last 2 fiscal years. We made sure of that as we were trying to do some back-end adjustments, right? So there are some where someone says, well, our IT stuff has gone up, but you've introduced new things in your environment. And that's not necessarily OITS increasing your rate. You actually have new servers that you've brought on. So maybe you were at 3 and now you're at 4. You have increased cost, right? So there's also some of that's in play. But what I will say is that we will share with you all of the rate work that we've done over the last year, last 3 fiscal years, how and where we leveled those rates. We reduced the rates. That very first year I came in, was it 105, 120 rates? We took it down and reduced them to 32 rates. I now only have about 17. Okay, so we've been doing the work to clean these rates up and to ensure that the agency have an understanding. The next phase of what I am rolling out is a part of one of the tools that we have, which is called Aptio. It's a financial management tool. Once it is fully deployed, probably by next fiscal, an agency will actually be able to click in and see by bucket how they're spending. We're almost there. Right? We've been working on it for over a year. And so I'm hoping that that will also continue to help with the transparency for an agency of understanding where those dollars are.
Chair, thank you. I want to just second and third what the representative and the chairman said. Great response. I'll be able to pass that along as we go through our budget hearings. But thank you, Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And if you thought that argument came up a great deal in the last 2 or 3 years, you should have seen it before. Oh my gosh. It looked, I don't know, they weren't random numbers, I'm sure, but they kind of came across that way. All right, Representative Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Burns-Wallace. Do you have a couple questions? So just for point of clarification, understanding the difference between utilization and what your fees are, but so you're saying that for fiscal year 23 it's flat. It's like,
So 21 and 22, we kept the rates relatively flat.
okay, and so fiscal year 23, basically things go up to a certain percent?
There is an increase in some rates, not all of them, and there's actually a couple of rates that decreased in 23. We will send you the rate packet so you can actually see where they were when I came in 20, which were already set before I took over the role, and the changes that we made for 21, 22, and 23. We have a packet that shows you which ones went up, which ones went down, which ones we consolidated, and so forth.
Do you have, if you don't mind, I run a small business. I mean, supplier costs have been going like crazy the last year. It's really just, but, do you have a sense of like your overall rate increase was like 1.5% or anything like that? Or
No, it wasn't. So we didn't do, so please understand that we do not take our rates and just increase them collectively. Part of the work that we've been doing over these last 3 years is that when we came in, there was a reality that you could look at a rate and you actually couldn't figure out where the rate came from. I'm just going to be honest. I said this when I first came before committees that first year, right? So what we've done is every year we've gotten closer to making sure that that rate is matching actual costs, right? And so what you will see, for instance, I want to say it's network and telecom. So there were some strange things going on in that rate. And some of those things where we were charging for different parts of telecom, we just eliminated all of those because we're like, those don't even need to be there because what you pay for that line encompasses the actual cost, right? That's where we've been able to eliminate things. And then I want to say this year in FY23, the network and telecom is coming down because we refined that to make sure that it is more accurately reflecting the cost. I see your face. Please understand, when I took over this agency in the fall of 19, I spent my first 60 days not focused on what was wrong with the technology, but what was going on with the fiscal situation. I testified between the budget committees. It was probably like a 3-hour session where I walked through everything that I had found and that I didn't quite understand. So we have worked the last 3 years where I can show, and that was one of the reasons some of you may remember, we had a federal payback that we had to pay back because we were overcharging in a number of rate categories year after year. We've corrected that as well. We modified those rates accordingly. We submitted to the federal to make sure that we're now accurate and online. So I do want to get you the packet because it's not a We just increased the rates overall. We truly are working to make sure these rates are matching on our real costs. There's some pieces of this when you do certain things. So O365 is a great example. That's a license, right? So that does pull us with the market. That's one of the areas that is going up, but that's because that's that licensure by Microsoft. And there's a reality that across the market, CIOs across all states, when we say oh 365, we have that moment of like, oh, because it's creeping on us. But at the same time, we've now worked in that one, for instance, it's still going up, but in the last few years, we've added new services in it. We've truly expanded during the virtual times, the Teams service, the call-in service through Teams. We've expanded the end-user management tool within O365. So what we've tried to do is work with that vendor to activate other services, knowing that our licenses are going up, but trying to get more for what we're still paying for. But that's a good example of one that's going up. Our telecom one is coming down a bit, if that helps.
Another question. Again, this is back in your Department of Administration hat, but you guys are also kind of the lessee, are the leasing agent. I mean, all these agencies lease space from you. How has that, I presume it's on the per square foot that you do leasing.
Rents, we collect rent.
Rent, okay. The rents they pay, I mean, how has that changed for the agencies this last year?
I have to look. Our rent rate has increased just slightly over the last few years. I want to say, I don't want to guess. Let us get you the rent rate and how that has changed over the last few years. One of the interesting things about that rent rate, though, is that as we start to do some projections going forward with the introduction of docking back into the Capitol complex and that square footage, it can have an impact on that rent rate that actually might bring it down just a little bit or level it as well, because I have more square footage that is in play. Remember our rent rate, and we'll provide both the rent rate and what's in there. There is a percentage of that rent rate that also comes to pay for the places in the Capitol complex where we don't charge rent, like the State House, right? So there's an additional 2.5% maybe that's on there, right? But what we do is we take our whole, the whole operation of our square footage, our operating costs and all of that, and that's what helps to make that adjustment in those rent rates. So it's like factors. Again, we can't overcharge for things. We have to charge within a certain range because there are state agencies that are able to pay things like rent and other things with federal funds. So we're always, trying to stay in line with that. So I want to say our rent rate's gone up just slightly over the last few years, but every year when that rate process happened, just like I do in IT, in D of A, I have to do the same things. We have to look at our costs, our square footage, what's available, all of those types of things to make sure we're setting that rent rate accordingly. Our rent rate does run a little bit higher than, say, the average lease rate in the Capitol, right? Like in the downtown area, right? But there's a partial reason for that is what we also remind people is that our rent rate isn't just, you got that square footage. That comes with cleaning. It comes with the shoveling of the sidewalks. It comes with the free parking lot down at the end of the complex. So our rent rate isn't all encompassing. If you're in a state-owned building, all of the things and all the services that come with it are a part of what you're paying for rent.
One more question, if you don't mind.
You already said one more.
Oh, one additional on top of that previous one. In the whole area of IT, I mean, one of the things that continues to be a real issue is just, cybersecurity. I mean, you literally have, foreign nations or people with very sophisticated resources as far as attacking, governmental agencies. And how do you keep the state of Kansas from being, held ransom to some cyber attack? I mean, what's
So cybersecurity is one of my passions that actually hits close to home. We will make sure to share the most recent report that came out of the Cybersecurity Task Force, which we just finished, which really focused on whole of state for Kansas. So that task force had legislators, it had public and private sector, it had state and local individuals. And we just provided the report. It just came out a couple weeks ago with 41 recommendations for the state going forward in cybersecurity. right? And a lot of this is built upon work that's already happening, but us needing to put some governance around it, put some coordination around it, and in some places, put some dollars around it as well. What we do with our day-to-day, we have a Kansas Information Security Officer, the KSO's office, that is under my purview, and I have a Chief Security Officer, Jeff Maxon. That office really works, and it was put in statute with the Kansas Cybersecurity Act 2018, I think. So the office is still relatively young. They really serve as an operational hub for the state right now, for like state agencies, right? They aren't necessarily doing all of the security work, but they're helping to do that monitoring. They're helping to do the advising, working with agencies to say, okay, here's all the patching that needs to happen. You know, here's a vulnerability. We need to double check and make sure we have everything in place. We stood up an information security officer dedicated to the non-cabinet agencies at no additional cost 2 years ago, because at one point in time, the idea was, again, going about rates, we're going to charge them $12 per person per month. And it's like, this is imperative to the state security that these smaller agencies that by size and in their size of operation are small. But when you think about some of our non-cabinet agencies, the scope of the data that they work with is statewide and it's massive, right? So it was imperative that we put that layer around them, and it couldn't be solely if you could pay for it or if you couldn't, right? That was a state need to have that security layer. So that's some of the work that we've been doing. What I will say is that as we continue to do this work from not that larger whole estate, and like I said, we'll share the report, but even from like the state agency perspective and what we do at the state level, cybersecurity and the work that needs to happen in that space right now is very expensive as well, right? And some of the things that you do in that space, it's not as easy as one-time costs, right? You can't go get a piece of equipment anymore. You need 24/7 monitoring, layering year after year, right? So we are also looking at how our current operation is set up and what we're doing and what we need to look like to position ourselves for the 3 to 5, right? What type of skill sets do we need? What type of partnerships do we need? We're working on a master contract right now for cybersecurity services so that we have multiple types of companies already on contract with the state. So when you have a need, you don't have to start from scratch with the RFP. We have vendors are, and we do this in other IT spaces, right? But we want to do one specifically in the cybersecurity space, and it's one of the recommendations in the report, so that we have certain type of vendors already on contract, and when that agency has a need, they can then deliver a task order against a pre-negotiated contract and get those services faster that are already vetted and competed. So that's some of the work that we're doing in that space.
No. Appreciate the response, and ditto to what y'all said.
Right, Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the presentation, Secretary. I just have one question on slide 2, and I guess, does your department believe that it is more cost-effective to lease out those, like you use the example of computers, leasing them for 3 or 4 years rather than buying them and being able to resell them after time?
So what I would say is when you look at desktop as a service, and desktop as a service really is focused on like the end user computer. So we're not leasing out other things, right? It is the idea of desktop as a service is that we're providing leasing for your desktop operations, just so that we're clear there. So we're not like leasing out servers or things like that, right? But in certain ways, the efficiencies are, some is dollars, right? But some is also, like I talked about from a budgeting standpoint, right? It allows an agency, particularly one with a smaller budget, to be able to budget across a period of time and to level those costs versus having, I got to buy 20 laptops in 1 year and I'm going to have this spike, right? Or I'm going to keep out of date equipment longer because I don't have the funds or I can't ask for that big dollar amount because I have a different issue. It allows them to manage better. It also allows us from a security standpoint to ensure that people have current up-to-date equipment available on a regular basis, right? It also helps us with things like our inventory and our assets. We can like see how and what types of equipment are we using and at what pace. What I will tell you is one of the moments where it was probably the most helpful was when we first started tackling COVID. And we literally, within a 20-day period of time, had to flip and be able to provide a laptop to 70% of the workforce for the state. And some of them were on desktops. We were able to flip some of those that were on our lease and get those laptops out. Having that vendor as a partner, if you went to, directly to certain entities, they didn't have them, but because they're an entity that are supplying to other people, they had stock. I mean, it was, so your benefits are, you have dollar benefits, but there are other benefits to being able to provide that service, particularly at the enterprise level, where you have a better understanding. We're able to get economies of scale differently because when you set up something like this, it's not just you can go and buy any laptop, right? There is a committee that determines these are the 8 pieces of equipment that are standardly used across state government. So then that vendor has the ability to have those 8 on hand and can deliver them imaged and ready to go in a certain number of days. You have those types of guarantees. I'm going to have a computer like in hand in 10 days, fully imaged with everything I need on it, and the person can just click a button, right? Those are some of the guarantees that are written into that contract that they help to deliver, right? So those are the types of things that also bring benefit to a desktop as a service.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Certainly. And I would dovetail on that as far as from a budgeting standpoint, one thing I hate to see are jagged lines. I like to see smooth lines, and that means predictable. And so I think moving, particularly for something that turns over as quickly as hardware, in 2 years, your computer is out of date, your phone is out of date, and it's probably got all kinds of nonsense shoved into it while it's in the process of getting out of date. And so the leasing aspect, I'm a huge fan of from a budgeting standpoint, if nothing else. No jagged lines. Perfect. That's the way
And it does have, we also have replacement in it. So for instance, if a lease piece of equipment goes down, we have the ability to then get them a new piece of equipment while that one is out for repair, right? Whereas if you own them, you're like, do we have any extras under the table that we can give them? That's part of those, like what we negotiate into the contract, that like we either have stock or they have stock that we can have a replacement within X number of days while their original piece is being repaired, So it's things like that. And that's where that partnership helps. But it also just helps agencies with planning. And that's a big part of these conversations.
Very good. All right, committee, any further questions?
Mr. Chair, I think you tried to use the whole of that hour.
My best.
You really
I
did.
recruited Paul for that specific effort. No, it looks like we fit it in quite perfectly. It is an absolute pleasure to have you here. I think I mentioned that last year. This agency used to be my biggest headache, and now it's the one that I look forward to reporting out. So that's the biggest compliment I can possibly pay you, right?
Appreciate it. And I know I'll see more of you all because this is just kind of the early phases. And so we'll see you again with the budget, and there's no surprises there. We're pretty flat. We're doing the same thing that we're doing. We're not asking for anything extra. We're just trying to do the things that we're doing right now and do them better, do them well. Excellence, consistency, quality. That's the work we're trying to deliver.
I think you're doing a bang-up job.
Thank you. All
All
right.
right, thanks for being here.
Of course.
Turned off my mic to speak to the committee. All right, committee, that is the only item on our agenda, and we're on the floor in 6 minutes. So we don't have any meetings. By the way, we don't have any meetings scheduled for next week at all. Something could pop up. I doubt it very seriously. We will be getting our budgets on the 31st. They'll start trickling in, and we'll start hearing them immediately because the month of February is going to be very busy. We have a full month where we'll be working hard. So we won't be working hard next week in this committee anyway. So with that, we are adjourned.